A very warm welcome to Charlie Ngounou from AfroLeadership. Charlie, thanks for joining us on Zooming In on Hate.
Thank you for inviting me.
So AfroLeadership works at the intersection of digital rights, civic engagement and good governance. Can you tell us how has online hate speech and disinformation affected democratic participation, especially among African communities and the diaspora from your day-to-day experience?
I have the religion to think that the online space, it's a sort of digital offline space. And so what happens online replicate what we see offline, but it adds, the power of technology, in kind of exponential propagation. It also adds something that we don't have offline, the anonymity, because offline means you have to be there, you have to be seen, you have to be heard, and then you have to be identified. And what online technologies provide, it's actually this sort of, keyboard shadow that you have. It keeps you from being there. And so it gave to someone who is who is not a benevolent actor, kind of power that you might not have when you are offline. And so when it comes to to everything, misinformation, hate speech, you can understand clearly how malevolent it can be, especially when you get to contexts where a rule of law is not in effect. And I will even say where the legal framework is not really designed. And if you take most of countries in Africa, as I can talk of Africa, we see that we are in a kind of various and diverse situation when it comes to the legal framework. We don't have the luxury of GDPR-like things that you have in Europe. We don't have those kind of continental framework that are enforced as you have here. And I can take an example. The Malabo Convention, on data protection and cybersecurity in Africa, it took more than 10 years for countries, for the, the 15 countries expected for ratification. And so it means we are in a space where, the conscience of what kind of bad someone can effect online is not really, really strong. Meaning also that we are reaping, and I'm saying this unfortunately, we are reaping, the non-readiness of democratic culture because we are not yet there. If we go from my hypothesis that I started with, that online try to replicate what we see offline. So if you don't have democracy working, smoothly, I know it's still in progress, but at least when you are in the right direction, it changes things. But if you are not in the right direction, as we see in so many countries in Africa, and now we see it even in the world globally, it means it's very, very difficult to curb hate speech, extremism, kind of high polarization that we see today. It's difficult to curb that online.
I can totally imagine. And indeed, as you said, Charlie, the DSA, the Digital Services Act, is a luxury. We're very lucky in Europe to have this legal framework to guide us to regulate social media. but it's not without its flaws, but it's great that it is there. And can you paint a picture for us of the impact the online world has on African communities you work with? What are the positives and the negatives from your perspective? And can you tell us a little bit about how it differs regionally? I know we're talking about a huge land area. I don't underestimate that, but I'd love to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, the diversity that you are implying in your question is natural for Africa, because our history has been, first of all, built on diversity. We had naturally, originally tribal diversity, very high, intense diversity, and that met colonizers who were themselves very diverse, and with so many diverse, if I have to use the adjective again, diverse, objective, intentions, purpose. And so if you add to this the aspect of local religious behaviors and foreign religions that came, languages that mixed to local languages, and also the kind of education style that we receive, and all those things shows clearly that Africa is really, really diverse, and I'm not exhaustive in listing these examples of diversity. Given that, means if we have to assess what is going on in Africa, talking of the online benefits or maybe disadvantages of being there, it's clear that it will be varied in the fact that technology itself is not a given. Africa is not the most connected, as we know, and even when it comes to being connected, it relies to the economic power of people being connected. And if you add to that digital literacy, that is not a given. Once more, a problem with literacy, natural literacy, those who go to school, they empowered, by the educational system, and then after that you don't have, let's say, jobs, it will be difficult to connect. If I take my example, most of the time, 2 gigabytes is almost $2.
Wow,
and
that's very steep.
I see you being surprised,
Yeah.
but that's what it is. And if you take that, most people, there are so many people in Africa living under $1 per day. 2 gigabytes for $2, it's already very, very exclusive. And meaning that for the benefits, it's clear that online technologies have brought so many great things in Africa. And the first thing I will talk about, and this is all over the continent, because of the need of the people everywhere, whatever their condition, socio-economic condition, the need for freedom, the need to be heard, the need to be seen. And so in that sense, the offline constraints that we usually face in so many parts of the continents because of various, and we come back to the diversity once more, because of the various political systems or maybe political birth certificate that we have, those constraints can be bypassed by the online space, because it gave us to be somewhere. And then in this case, the keyboard is not a curtain. A keyboard becomes a kind of ally, because it gave us to have a space where we can speak, where we can really, really share our concerns, and where we can also assemble. We can gather with people, and we can gather in space where, in principle, people are not excluded by nature. So in that sense, we can build communities online, we can build we can also build principles online, and that's very important. We can learn. We can also do business, as we were talking of the constraints, economic constraints that we might face in Africa. I think the online space has brought so many advantages when we think of the economic advantage, all those young influencers. I see even translators, just to talk of those, even the gig economies, even though there are so many problems, with social benefits of those who are in the gig economy, we see clearly that there are so many benefits. There are also benefits in the political scene, because today we see people are being more educated about what actually is political space. If they can't, for various reasons, if they can't do their political exercise on the street because of most of the political violence that they might face, being online is a great space, just to share and to get involved in political affairs. And also the fact that we have been more informed. And we see clearly that being more informed brings people to shout their concern about what is going on, because if you have constraints in the offline space, because it's easy to get under censorship offline. It's absolutely difficult to do that online. And even though so many countries, not only in Africa and even in the world, has been using, trying to replicate censorship online with internet shutdowns and things like that, we see clearly that it's very difficult. And there are so many organizations, and AfroLeadership is part of so many networks, fighting against internet shutdowns. That means clearly that we see that it's more difficult to censor people when you get to use technologies, and that's also another benefits, meaning that we can enjoy sort of freedom, a true freedom when we are clearly online. And also, it's also a space. You were talking about governance, but advocacy for good governance has found a space, for very real expression when we are online, because you are more educated, you are more informed, you can find information. Even, I work also in fiscal transparency, and I say most of our governments has been used historically to share information about public affairs with international organizations, IMF, World Bank, for obvious reasons. That's where you go to get the money when you don't have. But today, as those organizations are also forced to be open, sometimes we go through them to get the information, and then it forces governments everywhere in Africa to be open by default, because there is no way hiding sort of information. It's already is the open space through some other organizations that are accountable, to their own stakeholders. So very great benefits. But now we also see that there are risks, so many risks when it comes online, and the fact that being in the space, or maybe being in the position of enjoying those benefits we just talked about, is not really equated with the education that we need to behave online. So, hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, because the kind of urgency of communicating online has not been balanced with a serious education on how to behave on that same space. So at times, hate speech doesn't come only from political actors. It comes from the social settings, from the communities that are there, that can bring online things that they live offline. If I hate someone because of his religion, because of his political position, because of any kind of reason, it's easy to let it propagate online. It's easy to speak loudly online because you see that you are protected. At times people do it even, openly, because the legal framework, just to come back to that, the legal framework is not swift enough to maybe to punish someone that is actually doing that. So those are the problems that we face. And we face also the kind of dependency that we get today. When you are only online, it becomes risky for you if you are shut down, if you are removed, without warning, as we see today. And we see today that governments are using, technologies to prevent people from being online. And that becomes a problem. Those are the kind of risks. Why we have decided at AfroLeadership and in conjunction with so many networks to get into the advocacy and to talk of what is happening and to add our voice to global voice against, this tech censorship that is becoming a norm today. And we see so many technologies being used, and the more our governments or maybe bad political actors become acquainted with technologies that can censor citizens, the more you see that happening. And we need to work on that, because that's a great risk. That's maybe a disadvantage, but that we can also fight against.
Very, very interesting, and different issues to the issues that we're experiencing here in Europe. But what I'd love to hear about is what challenges African civil society organizations when they're trying to counter online harms, and how do those challenges differ from what you're hearing here in Sofia in Bulgaria at the moment?
My first point is, as a civil society organization, it's clear that we don't have resources. And I'm not talking of money. I'm talking of technical resources, because technology itself is very complex. And mixing technology with, with the issue around rights, or human rights, as we call it, digital rights today, it's more and more complex. Yeah. So that's a challenge, actually. And most of the time, traditional civil society organizations has not been, even when they were absolutely devoted to human rights, talking human rights online is not really a same matter. It means we need to understand the tricks of the game, and in that space, I think we need more on the training, on the capacity building on these topics. 2 days back, I followed Max Schremm. You are a fellow European that has done so many great things here for human rights online. And when I watch the slides he was sharing about the constraints that you face in Europe, even just to enforce, judicial decisions, I was asking myself, I was in Helsinki at my Data Global conference, and I was asking myself, how, if here in Europe you are already facing this, how can we get out of this situation? How can we win these sort of battles in a context where the legal framework is not really strong? How can we? And that's my question. I don't have an answer with this, but this adds to the constraints that civil society organizations face in our context. And also we have to admit that even if the legal system was clear, Is the judicial system strong enough? Does it understand clearly the stakes? Are they being educated, trained, sensitized to what is really happening, to the online intricacies and complexities of the issues at hand? I have a tendency to say no. We have time. We still have, a very great margin to go from the traditional topics of the digital system to these new ones. Coming with those GAFAMs or maybe multinationals coming from Asia. And meaning that those are the real problems that we have as civil society. I don't want to talk of the constraints faced by organizations as civil society. I want to talk of the contextual constraints, because I think that's where the stakes are. If you are a strong civil society organization, and there are some in Africa, very powerful, very well-resourced, even with money, but if you are in a context where the political system is not strong enough, to enforce a given decision that has been taken, it's easy to get discouraged. And in that sense, I think to come back to the luxury that you have with GDPR, and DSA and so on, I think I dream of that maybe, and that can be done at the level of a country, given the geographical dispersion of this, and also the fact that, technology, the use of technology crosses barriers. So it has nothing, once more, it shows the difference, the exponential difference between offline situations, problems, with what we face online. In my view, we need a legal environment that is very, very strong. It doesn't have to do with the tech. The tech, they are doing whatever they do, but we need the instruments, as you have in Europe, to protect African citizens and to protect African space from the harm, from the possible and eventual harms that online technologies can bring forth.
Yeah, and indeed, Charlie, it's wonderful that you're learning from our mistakes and taking what's relevant to you, and I really, really hope that regulation comes to Africa, and I hope you're that pioneer. Thank you so much for joining us on Zooming In on Hate.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.